What's up, everyone? We'll give people a minute. This is normally the breakfast training talk, little YouTube videos I put together and share them out. So if you guys are curious about these videos, all the other episodes are on Always an Athlete YouTube page. So I got my coffee here. I got my cornfield view, and we're going to dive into the topic a little bit today about how we can modify some of our plyometrics based on the demands of our current training, kind of the individual. And as always, these little chats are kind of quick and to the point. They'll be about 8 minutes long, so you guys can have your breakfast, have your coffee, and get over with it. So when it comes to plyometrics, there's a couple of great things that are well, when I say plyometrics, by the way, I kind of just mean all types of jumping exercises. I know traditionally plyometrics have typically been categorized more in that shock method, like Yuri Verkhoshansky type stuff, where you jump off of a box and you have a rapid stretch shortening cycle. I'm more talking about just the general ballistic actions. Now, what we can do in order to organize our own training is be aware of some of the pros and cons that naturally come with any type of jumping and ballistic exercise. One of those cons being the impact and eccentric demands that we put on our body over and over again from having to land from these movements. Yes, what goes up must come back down, and unfortunately so, the landing portion can leave some wear and tear. People get sore and achy from if you're playing basketball. Why? Because you're running, pounding your feet, doing change of direction. In the same way a lot of people get sore from doing hurdle jumps or even different kind of plyometrics. Why? Because you're constantly dealing with some impact demands. On the same side of that, dealing with those impact demands is actually a good thing at times because you're building up that capacity. In my example, we have basketball and maybe some plyometrics. Well, you've already dealt with a lot of impact demands, so we still want some maximal intent jumping, but how do we organize that in a way that we're not going to make ourselves so unnecessarily kind of beat up, for a lack of better words? And that's we're looking at basically how we can modify our landings, and specifically what we're jumping on and what we're jumping to help put that together. So a couple of ways we can modify the impact demands. You can think about one, adding a box to jump onto. It's pretty an obvious one. We've all seen that. Things like a box jump that allows us to have maximal intent effort. We can jump onto a box, but the issue with a box jump is it's not repeatable. Once you jump onto a box, you have to step off the box and jump onto it again. So this is where a little solution to this, how do we find a repeatable kind of plyometric-like action with a reduction in falling height? Well, we can use something like a hill. And if you guys saw my story or you saw my Twitter, I posted an image of how we can use a hill to help modify the amount of, or the height we fall from, essentially, when we're doing jumps. So if I jump in the air 30 inches and the elevation of the hill, just for simple math, is 20 inches per jump, that means I'm only landing from a 10-inch fall each time. Now, depending on how long that hill is, you can do multiple jumps in a row. This is reducing the impacts, but at the same time, you're getting that positive performance benefit of, jumping over and over again in a repeated stimulus. So that's a positive. Another option you can have is maybe something like a pool. Now, you do get repeated efforts in terms of, you're actually trying to jump over and over again, but you really don't have essentially much at all impact demand, which could be a good thing and maybe at times a bad thing, because you actually do want some impact demand if we're trying to challenge the stretch shortening cycle a little bit. But you do get to have repeat maximal effort ballistic contractions trying to jump in the air over and over again in the pool. And in that sense, we can have 10 jumps, 15 jumps and not be super worried about the impacts, but we're still having that volitional effort. So if you kind of get the theme by now, we're trying to find ways to have high volitional effort, trying to jump high, trying to move fast, trying to be explosive, without having to deal with the impact demands of, what happens when we jump high. And so that's kind of the cons that are typically associated with, impacts. But at the same time, impacts are very good. And let's point some of those out really quick, right? Because if we're jumping off a box like a drop jump, that's a great way to evoke the stretch shortening cycle. There's a lot of research that shows this is a learned phenomenon. It is a neural reflex that we can essentially get better at. And the way we do that is through an impact. We're training the ankles, knees, and hips to handle a abrupt stretching of the muscles upon a pre-tensed contact. My foot hits the ground, and I got to jump up high right afterwards, trying to minimize that ground contact time. In doing so, that rapid stretch stores some elastic energy energy in my muscles, and it helps me jump higher, as well as activating the stretch reflex, which is a reflex loop, which helps you, well, contract maybe a little more aggressively to get off the ground. And so in doing so, there are some benefits to having contacts. So we have to then, as a coach, weigh the situation of what's the capacity to handle high intensity contacts. At the same time, how many volitional ballistic efforts do we want? Because more times than not, they're not equal. You typically might want, you have a situation where you are like, well, I want to do a lot more jumps, but I don't want to have to deal with all the impacts, because the individual you're working with might not have the capacity at the moment, nor be in the time of year where they can handle lots of impacts. So one goal is we want to build up their capacity to handle more impacts, but at the same time not be limited by the number of jumping efforts we can perform, because they themselves can't do many, well, impacts. So that is a good way to think about this kind of balancing act, as there's a bug on my head. And we can say, okay, look, I want to strategically organize these go away, fly. Strategically organize these impacts, and then we want to then make sure our jumping portion is counterbalanced with it, so that we don't have to have every jump have to have a vicious impact. This fly is the most distracting thing on Instagram Live of all time. So we don't, now there's two. Oh my goodness. Okay, whatever. We'll just deal with it. We had to have an organization of, good Lord, get out of here. Organization of, I'm moving the site. I can't handle it. We have to have to go for a walk. We're dealing with it. You get to see the cornfield here. We have to have an organization of the ability to handle impacts, as well as deal with the need to actually jump. And so our solution as coaches then needs to be something along the lines of organizing or being aware of how many times can someone actually handle an impact, and how many jumps we're actually trying to perform, and where do I want to get them to in regards to actually handling those impacts. And once I have that kind of stratification, and I start to understand, look, I want to be able to have someone handle, say, 20 or 25 impacts, but I need, say, 30 or 40 jumps, then you can start to layer in those non-impact kind of jumping movements. So we might do, 2 sets or 5 of drop jumps, and then maybe we're going to do something like 5 sets of 4 of box jumps, because we're eliminating that excessive demands. And so as this fly never lets me be, I've never had this problem before. Now we're just getting attacked by a fly. They're trying to drink my coffee over here. This is the morning view, by the way, for everyone joining. But that's the idea. So we have to organize that as a whole. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole too far, because I just want to address it and bring it up here in our kind of morning discussion, something to think about, because there is no perfect solution as to what is the perfect number of jumps or number of impacts we should be trying to provide. At the end of the day, we want to raise the capacity for someone to handle more impacts. We want them to be able to deal with plyometrics, whether it's hurdle hops or drop jumps or higher impact or contact ones. And we also want to be able to find ways to work around the lack of capacity. And so providing those box jumps, even loaded jumps of certain nature, that we all got to think about the capacity involved. So I'm going to head out here, as these flies have somehow hijacked my Instagram Live. The most annoying thing of all time. Wasn't expecting it, but oh well. And I'll end you guys with a view of the cornfield. I appreciate y'all and hope y'all enjoy. I'll try and save this. I'll put this up on my Always an Athlete YouTube page. So as always, take care and enjoy your coffee. I'm going to eat my oatmeal and drink my coffee now. So I appreciate y'all and have a good day.